joining me. The first thing I wanted to ask is, how's everything been going with you during this pandemic and all this madness and stuff going on?
Been really relaxed, nothing stressful or strange. No, it's been, like it has been for everybody else, unpredictable and kind of weird, but I'm healthy and my family is healthy and we have food in our bellies, so nothing to complain about.
I guess I would have to, feel the same way. I feel as though in this time of unpredictability, you got to be thankful for what you have and learn a lesson from each day that goes and just go with the flow, right?
Right, right.
Yeah. So, first of all, thank you so much for joining the Expanding Our Roots series. I'm looking forward to learning more about you and your background and the work that you do. And one of the first questions I always ask to kind of start off the conversation is one that goes all the way to the beginning of probably everybody's journey. And that
Okay.
is the very commonplace question: where are you from?
I am originally from Miami, Florida. I was born and raised in a suburb of Miami, Florida called Cutler Ridge. I think it's called Cutler Bay now, but when I was growing up there, it was called Cutler Ridge. But yeah, Miami was home for the first 23, 24 years of my life. It was a really interesting city to call home and to grow up in, and still visit, still go back home from time to time. I have obviously haven't been back in a while now with travel being what it is in 2021, but that was home.
So I actually have gone to South Florida twice in my life at very different parts of my life. So I went,
Mhm.
I think when I was 5 years old, I went with my
Okay.
family, and my mom used to tell me the story that she once saw Christina Aguilera filming a video on South Beach.
That
So
sounds
I
about
guess
right.
to give you an idea of my age, basically I was 5 when Christina Aguilera was filming a video in Miami, and
Okay.
the second time was actually 80 years ago when I was going there to look at Florida International and as a
My alma
possible school that
mater.
I was going to go to for National Student Exchange. And I
Yep.
would have to say that going to South Florida for very different times in my life. One, when I was 5 and barely remembered it, and
Mhm.
two, when I was only there for like a day and a half. I
Yep.
don't have an understanding of what it's like to live in South Florida or in Miami specifically. So tell me what it was like to grow up in South Florida and to live in Miami.
So oftentimes I will describe Miami as a place that might be, from my vantage point anyway, might be a better place to visit than to live. It is a city that runs on tourism, and I think what most people think of Miami as being is really centered around, you know, uh, the fun, the nightlife, the international culture that exists there because there are so many different kinds of people within the city, and all of that is true. All of that is true. But in terms of living there on a daily basis and kind of weaving in and out of the different worlds that exist within Miami, it can be a difficult place in the sense that it's a very hectic place. For anybody who complains about driving here in Louisiana, you ain't seen nothing yet. Miami is a whole nother beast, you know, not just traffic in terms of, kind of gridlock kind of stuff, but on the flip side of that, you've got culture upon culture upon culture, different pockets within the city that can be explored. The food is incredible. My wife is of Cuban descent, and she would take me around to all sorts of restaurants, little hole in the wall places. The food in Miami is incredible. Uh, Nightlife from South Beach to North Miami Beach to um, all different areas. It's really an incredible city, but it's a lot. Like you have to be ready to be going 100 miles an hour at all times. And I don't know that that was for me. So that's why I've really enjoyed my time in Baton Rouge and in Louisiana.
Miami is a very interesting place from what I've seen. There are so many different media depictions of Miami.
Yeah,
When I was growing up, it was CSI Miami.
yeah,
And,
yeah.
that was one form of Miami that I saw. And then
Right.
for people of an older generation, Miami Vice.
Yep.
And then also another way that I saw Miami was through this film called Markley and Me, with, you know, the film depiction of the book with, I
Yeah.
think, Owen Wilson and Jennifer Aniston.
Yeah.
And for me, that was a more tame version of Miami, more
Mhm.
domesticated, less, you know, let's figure out who killed somebody, you know, kind of
Yeah.
murder mystery thing that CSI had going on. But
Right.
then also in politics, you hear about Miami a lot because of the large Cuban American population and a lot of Latin Americans from South America who live in Miami. And it's very different because South Louisiana has mostly Central American Latinx
Right.
folks. And I know in Miami, there's a lot of Caribbean and South American Latinx folks. So it's like a different culture there as well. And yeah, tourism and entertainment is very big in Miami. I'm not sure why specifically, because I mean, I'm not from Miami, I wouldn't know, but it just feels like Miami is a city that runs off of tourism, entertainment, nightlife, almost like similarly to Las Vegas in a sense.
I think Miami is a city that runs off spectacle more than anything else. You know, like
Mhm.
there needs to be the flash, there needs to be the polish, and you know, it's a big, complex, sprawling city, and all of those things you mentioned are true in their own sense. The Miami Vice, the CSI, and probably the Marley and Me as well. But you know, it's interesting. You know, you bring up politics and the different cultures from the Caribbean nations. You know, one of the things that I think back to a lot is I'm a big baseball fan. I used to love going to baseball games in Miami, and really a lot of people didn't. Like the Marlins, which is the team in Miami, is not a popular baseball team historically. And when I lived there, it was even less popular, I think, than it is now. And so you could go to a baseball game and sit there and like kick your feet up on the chair in front of you, you know, and nobody would care because nobody was really there. But the one of the things that would always strike me was the different fan bases that you'd see within a stadium, and they would bring flags and kind of cheer on the players representing those nations. So you'd have um, a pocket of people waving a Dominican flag in left field and a Venezuelan flag in right field. And so there was an interesting um, flavor in the air, I guess, with respect to how those different cultures kind of coexisted and still held on to, you know, the pride of their own background.
And also, I think it's a testament to how diverse America itself is.
Mhm.
Because I know Miami has a lot of Caribbean influences and a lot of different influences with regards to the Caribbean and Latin American populations as well. But
Yeah.
then if you go to New York, further up the East Coast, it's a very different animal. There's
Mhm.
like different cultures there. Then Chicago has different cultures, New Orleans has different cultures, LA has
Sure.
different cultures. So it's like if you go to different parts of America, it's almost like going to different countries. We are both now in Louisiana, but I grew up in Baton Rouge. You grew up in South Florida, and yet these two very distinct places are in the same country, and I think that's a beautiful
Right.
thing.
No question. No
Yeah.
question. It's
Well,
it's wild to think how you can travel this one country and visit so many different pockets of culture.
Well, speaking of spectacle, as you mentioned earlier, I read in your background that you used to do entertainment journalism as a freelancer. So I
Yeah.
wanted to ask about your experiences being in entertainment journalism, probably a multi-layer question. So I wanted to know what the experience was like. How was it different to be a freelance journalist as opposed to working for a publication? And what were some of the cool interviews that you had the chance to do?
It was honestly a life-changing experience that I kind of stumbled into. It actually started after my wife and I moved to Baton Rouge. Um, Long story short, we ended up doing work in restaurants around town. And one morning, I picked up a copy of what is now, I think, called Dig, or was called Tiger Weekly at the time. And they had done an interview with a blues guitarist, and I wasn't a big fan of the writing of that piece. And I reached out to them and asked, you know, I didn't necessarily consider or think of myself as a writer, but thought, you know, I could do this. I could probably do a better job than this person did. And so I started doing some writing, started doing some interviews, and eventually kind of worked my way up that way. And I started, you know, interviewing different bands and visual artists. actors, directors, and just had, I mean, an absolute blast. They were sending me, free tickets to concerts and free CDs and albums. And so that was a lot of fun. One morning, I interviewed George Clinton from Parliament Funkadelic, and that was kind of a big, big moment, one that I was really nervous about and excited about. He spent probably an hour on the phone with me, and it was a lot of him talking about how, Dr. Dre and Outkast wouldn't have been possible without him and Funkadelic and Snoop Dogg, and just, I mean, just talked and talked, and I just let him talk. And that night, I'm writing the article about, that would come from the interview. I think at the time he was playing Jazz Fest or leading up to a Jazz Fest performance, or maybe Voodoo. And I turned to my wife and said, if I could do something like this, the reason that we moved to Baton Rouge was to go to law school. My intention was to go to law school at LSU. I said, but if I could do something like this, I mean, if I could, I'm having a blast. If I could do this, and my wife, who is a painter and an artist, said, then do that. Why is this an issue? And it was as if a little light went off in my head and said, oh, okay, I didn't consider it like it was a realistic option. And within 6 months or so, I was working at Baton Rouge Gallery, working here doing some work. So certainly that was the George Clinton interview was a big one for me. I interviewed Willie Nelson's harmonica player, who's a big name in that world. The first time I went backstage with a band was the New Orleans Bingo Show, which was just an incredible act, and kind of blew my mind when I first moved to Baton Rouge and first moved to Louisiana. Somebody said, the New Orleans Bingo Show is a band you need to check out. And they kind of blended performance art with music and vaudeville kind of clown acts. So yeah, it was that kind of writing experience was really, really special.
So when in the timeline was this? Because I also know that you mentioned earlier that you had moved to Baton Rouge. Walk me through your journey of going from South Florida to South Louisiana.
My wife and I, both born and raised in Miami, hadn't lived anywhere else, and had kind of come to the realization that it was time for us to call somewhere else home, at least for a while. And I had been on a track towards law school since I was probably 11. I'd been working towards the goal of being a criminal prosecutor, because I thought that was how I would end up doing good in the world, by pursuing that. And then when we decided that we were going to leave South Florida, we started looking around different areas. I'm not a big fan of the cold, so I didn't want to go too far north. And LSU seemed like a good fit for me. So we came up to Baton Rouge in April of 2005 to look around, and we spent really a long weekend here. And the city seemed wonderful. Seemed like a place that had enough of the trappings of a city to for us to call home and move to. And then we got married on August 12th, 2005. Went on a honeymoon, and then packed up a U-Haul and moved to Baton Rouge. And 2 days later, Katrina came.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It actually passed through South Florida the day that we left. And the entire time my mom's on the phone, you have to come back. Everything's, blowing over. Everything's going to hell. Which it wasn't. It was a category 1 at the time. I think that it went through South Florida. But it came here, and my wife and I, we were kids when Hurricane Andrew absolutely ripped through South Florida, decimated my home. My family and I, we were in a FEMA trailer for a number of months after Hurricane Andrew. So, when it comes to those large scale hurricanes, I have no problem getting the hell out of town rather than trying to ride something out that shouldn't be ridden out. We ended up going to Natchitoches for about a week and a half to try and, escape the storm, since we didn't know the apartment building that we moved into or anything. So yeah, so my experience of Baton Rouge kind of started with Hurricane Katrina coming through town.
For me, that was a very transformative experience for me because
Sure.
I don't mind telling my age. I was 6 when 9/11 happened. So I
Mm.
don't remember that day that much. I
Yeah.
remember Katrina very vividly. And I remember just how Katrina was a transformative moment for me, not only as an American, but also as a Louisianian and also as a, as a young person, because that was the first world event I witnessed. And I witnessed my community change dramatically overnight because of that. Because where's the first place that people who were escaping Katrina would go? Baton Rouge. It's an
Right.
hour north, not too far. And until 2008, Baton Rouge was like that place that we all felt like, okay, no hurricane will touch Baton Rouge.
Yeah.
We're good to go. We're fine. And so that changed the community. And it also was when you started having a lot more conversations about equity and disaster preparedness. And then I started to see people take hurricanes more seriously. Because
Yep.
after Katrina, when they said evacuate, the people evacuated. And
Yep.
then Gustav hit, and that was when that whole veil of protection that Baton Rouge had no longer existed, because a lot of people were without power for a month with
Yep.
Gustav, and then in Baton Rouge. And then, of course, 2016 basically took away this idea that Baton Rouge was invulnerable to any natural disaster.
Yep.
And so I think Katrina was very transformative for a lot of young people and a lot of people in general at that time. So for you to have moved to Baton Rouge during this transformative moment in just the region's history and just in terms of our life and lived experiences, I'm sure that must have been one heck of an adjustment.
Well, and it felt like the city was, it was an adjustment for us in terms of, coming into a new state where we didn't really know anybody. It might as well have been a dart at the map in some respects for us. But it was interesting because you could feel in the air that there was a transformation going on. It was apparent. There was some uncertainty. There was, a huge influx of people into the city. There was a city that was adjusting to not only, the natural disaster, but the impact of those people moving around. Like all the people who were impacted, not only do they have the trauma that came from the storm and the aftermath of the storm, but then they have to pick up and move and try and find a new home, whether that's in Baton Rouge or Houston or wherever they ended up. And it just, there was certainly some unease in the air. Only
Yeah.
person that we had a connection with in Baton Rouge when we moved was somebody who was lining up a paralegal like position for me so that I would have employment in Baton Rouge. And his life completely got upended and he moved to Houston. And so here we are, we were 23, I think, having moved literally 1,000 miles away from home, knew nobody except this one person. And then he skipped town and here we are, what do we do now? So it was uneasy for us personally, but like you said, uneasy for the city and the state.
I really feel as though in the case of American history, anytime something impacts a community, the rest of the country sees it very differently than the people in that community. I remember going to the New York State History Museum in Albany when I was living in New England. And as an outsider, 9/11 was like, oh, it was this horrible event. But then actually seeing the impact that 9/11 had on New Yorkers, both residents of New York City and also the state of New York, was a very different experience. Same thing with Katrina. There's a difference between watching the storm unfold on CNN or whatever versus actually having to pick up and leave and seeing your family having to pick up and leave and have to build their lives all over again in front of your eyes and in your own community.
And I think that's why at the root of it, I'm going to guess that is a big part of why you do the work that you do, why you're having the conversations you have, because when those events, those traumas are happening to someone else, or they're happening in some other part of the world, it's easy to feel detached from it. You know, I was in South Florida when 9/11 happened, and we started thinking about, a lot of conversations were about, does that mean is the port of Miami going to be next? Like that's a big commerce center. There's a lot of international business going on through there. So I think there's some human nature in starting to think about how that trauma might relate to your own life and your own neighborhood. So I think it's some human nature to, focus closely, keep your focus close in some respects. We think about how we as Americans view international news, and we aren't always up to date on, world events outside of our borders. So it's a lot easier for us to focus in on news that is local, or, whatever local might mean in a certain context. But conversations like the ones that you're having, where we talk about being citizens of the world and global citizens, hopefully helps us expand that scope of how we consider things.
Well, later in the interview, probably at the end, I'll explain what expanding our roots means.
Okay.
And since we're talking about a lot of expanding ourselves, but
Right.
to get kind of back to the original jumping point of those questions, I wanted to get the timeline straight on when you were doing, I guess, freelance journalism,
Yep.
because I would assume that, just correct me if I'm wrong, you were doing a lot of in journalism when you were moving into Baton Rouge and just kind of getting into the community.
Yeah, so we got here in August of 2005.
Mm.
I want to say it was probably a year or so before I started doing the writing and the journalism work. And then, and I probably did that for 2 or 3 years, um, leading into my position with Baton Rouge Gallery.
How did it feel when you originally wanted to do law and it ended up being on a different career path? Was that an easy adjustment for you, or did you feel like, did you have moments where you were like, maybe I should have stuck with this law thing, with the law track?
I had a lot of those moments. It was a difficult transition. It was, there was some, um, what's the word I'm looking for? There was some nervousness about, you know, being uh, in the sense that we had moved away from home again, and it was kind of, on us to figure this out. But, I remember thinking, my wife's parents are under the impression that I am, going to law school, and their level of comfort with their daughter moving 1,000 miles away might be, in at least on some level, tied to the idea that, they'll be able to feed themselves and keep a roof over their head. And now he's going to go, write or work at a nonprofit art gallery. And just the fact that it was a complete 180, it was such a big, drastic transition from what I'd worked since I was 10 or 11 years old towards. My mother was very into whatever the big show trial of the day would be. I'm thinking of like the Casey Anthony trial, pardon the phones. And so she would see attorneys on TV, for years after I made the decision to not pursue law school. And she would, get on the phone with me and say, this attorney went to Duke. You could go to Duke. You could still do this. I was like, but I don't want to. Like, I've kind of made that switch in my head. And there were times when, I have 3 kids. There were times where a child was coming, or a bill was past due. And that thought, I think, it's a natural thought to kind of think about, what would my bank account look like if I had stayed on that track. But I will say that I have never once had an attorney tell me I made the wrong decision. I've never had a lawyer say that, I really messed up. So, but I'm over the moon at the ability that I had the privilege to make that choice. I had a wife who supported me and kind of pushed me towards it. I think she was never big on the idea of me being a lawyer to begin with, honestly. But yeah, there were definitely times where it was really tough, but certainly not a regret at all.
Well, look, you talked about the struggles of and wondering if the path you took was the right path or not. I always say that there's like three different kind of conversations that people have. There's coffee conversations, wine conversations, and whiskey conversations. Coffee conversations being the ones that are very professional. You go to a coffee shop, you talk about your experiences professionally, partnerships, all that kind of stuff. Wine conversations are very, telling stories, laughing, joking, socializing. And then you got the whiskey conversations. And I don't drink whiskey because I think whiskey tastes like cough syrup. But but whiskey, you got the whiskey conversations where you go really deep into some truths and some deep dives. And if you and I wanted to have a conversation about what I would consider to be those moments where you're doing nonprofit work and it feels like you're on the wrong track, and because things are just, life is putting you through the trenches. Now that is a whiskey conversation. That's a conversation I could have at another time. But you mentioned,
I do drink whiskey, so if you want to have that conversation, I'm all for it.
Okay, I'm not gonna drink whiskey, fine. but cool. But yeah, you talked about, you've mentioned more than once that you kind of eventually got involved with the Baton Rouge Gallery, which is what you do now.
Yeah.
I want to know how you got involved with the Baton Rouge Gallery and how you became the president and CEO of the gallery.
So it started when I was doing that writing. The gallery has a program that it's had for a long time called Movies and Music on the Lawn that pairs up silent films from the 1920s and 30s with local contemporary bands. And I was just doing an article about an upcoming presentation they were doing. And the woman who was working here at the time as their special events coordinator, and that title was, somewhat arbitrary in the sense that she was doing all sorts of things, marketing efforts and kind of serving as a press contact. And when I came up to the gallery to interview her, and she told me that she was leaving and they were going to be posting her job soon. And it seemed like a natural fit. At the time I had a child on the way and needed to kind of get out of waiting tables and get out of at least have something a little more stable than what I was doing at the time. And so I applied for the position, was fortunate enough to get the position. And the woman who was the director at the time, her name is Amelia Cox. Eventually, after about, I want to say about 6 to 9 months, her husband, who works with the federal government, took a position overseas in Italy. And so their family relocated. And at that point, she encouraged me to apply for the position. At the time, I said, I've never run a nonprofit. What do I, why do you think that I would be a good fit for this? And, she gave me a few reasons and said that I should put my hat in the ring, as they say. And so I was fortunate enough to get the position then and serve as director. That was the summer of 2008. And I've been with the gallery ever since.
If it makes you feel any better, when I was approached to run a nonprofit that I also started, I never ran a nonprofit. So things happen. You just
do.
You just gotta do what you gotta do, Hey. But
figure it out.
So you've basically been at the top for the BR Gallery for about 12, 13 years now.
Yeah.
Wow. It's been a journey. Sounds like it's been a journey. What have been some things that you've been able to do during your time as the president of the gallery?
The first one that comes to mind, because we're actually doing it right now, is a big show that we do every year called Surreal Salon. It is a show that is focused in on pop surrealism and lowbrow art. It started off as a one-night event featuring art from Louisiana-based artists, and has grown. We are now in our 13th year with that, and it's grown to an international show. The show that we have up right now through January 28th has artists from 17 different states and 4 different countries, including Argentina, Greece, and Canada, and obviously the US. So that's been one that we've been really proud of, that I've been really proud of. Something that we started, the staff here at the time was myself, Rodnina Hart, and John Michael Bird, and was really dreamt up as a one-night event, as something that could be as artistically substantive as it was fun. And we wanted to give the arts community something that could, they could really enjoy and have a good time with, and kind of bring a younger audience to the gallery and to the arts in Baton Rouge. But at no point did we ever consider that we'd still be doing it 13 years later, that it would be an international show, that Juxtaposed Magazine would cover it every year. So that's been something that we've been really excited about. But I mean, that's one of many. We've been lucky to, work on expanding that Movies and Music on the Lawn program I mentioned, bring a number of different bands and acts to that program. We're working on bringing other programming that will bring artists from outside of the Baton Rouge area to Baton Rouge Gallery, hopefully explore different media that maybe local artists don't get to explore too often, brings different perspective, different viewpoints to the walls of the gallery and to Baton Rouge.
It sounds like this art exhibit, the Surreal Salon, because it attracts international artists, it allows for people to see Baton Rouge in a different way, because Baton Rouge isn't often spoken about as a global city or even a global place beyond the 2 universities, Southern and LSU. So having this big art show where people from different parts of the world are like, you know what, I want to be a part of the show, even though it's in Baton Rouge, in this small city. Yeah. I think it just showcases a different side of Baton Rouge as a place that is capable of creating art and creating a culture and economy that thrives off of and provides great opportunities to be exposed to art and just the art scene in general.
There's no question. One of the things that kind of, I guess, the pet peeve of mine is this show is typically when we're not dealing with a pandemic, normally this show is punctuated by a big costume party that has live music and lots of different interactive things going on. And one of the things that we hear a lot is people saying things like, this doesn't feel like Baton Rouge. And they say it in a good way. They say it like they're having a great time. I can't believe this is happening in Baton Rouge. It's one of those, like, stop talking about your city that way. This is a city that has its flaws like any other, but there's a lot of great things going on in the city that I don't think we always appreciate enough. And to your point about, about Baton Rouge being a place that you can experience art, and people being aware of that, that's part of what we're hoping to do with the gallery. A lot of the artists who are part of the gallery live in the Baton Rouge area and exhibit, share their work all over the world. We have artists who share their work with galleries in London, I think one artist in particular I'm thinking of shared their work with a gallery in Hungary a few years ago. So Baton Rouge is lucky to have a number of artists, and that's just the art. I'm just thinking of the artists who are part of this gallery. There's obviously others who are not, but there is a huge wealth of artistic talent, and not just in the visual arts. The musicians that we have here, the writers, it's just a matter of us making sure that Baton Rouge and the Baton Rouge area knows, what incredible artists we have. Giving them an opportunity to connect with them.
Yeah, and it also gives people from other parts of the world to see the kind of art that we can produce as well.
No question. Yeah.
So what have been some challenges? Because, it's easy to talk about the good, fabulous, beautiful things that we do in the nonprofit, but the challenges are typically the things that we don't like to talk about because it requires a level of vulnerability, and it also admits that things don't always go exactly how you plan. So what have been some challenges that you've experienced running the art gallery?
I'd say early on, it's because I've been here, I think in part at least, because I've been here a good while, it is not as present as it used to be. But especially early on, you'd run into a lot of that's not the way it's done, or that's not the way it has been done. And a lot of roadblocks to trying new things, and fear around failure and things like that. Um, that was a big one for a little while. And not to, I've always been very lucky to have, supportive board of directors and things like that. But being open to change and being open to trying new things, or trying things a different way, that was a hardship for a while. And then, like every other nonprofit, the search for funding, the search for support, um, to keep things going, and to be able to focus in on a mission that may not always be something that is commercially viable, but something that depends on the support of, generous individuals or foundations, or support from government agencies. Um, that is not unique to Baton Rouge Gallery, or unique to Baton Rouge, but it's the reality of nonprofit structure in the U.S.
Yeah, people are often scared of what they don't understand, and they're
Mm-hmm.
also scared of something that is different because either they think that it's not going to work, so they operate off of a place of fear,
Yep.
or they're jealous because they know that something that you're doing that's different could be better than what they've done all their lives and have known to be
Sure.
successful. And you find another way, and they're like, well, you're not doing it right, like because they're jealous. So
Right.
it's a very tough position to be in. But again, that's just the territory that you kind of find yourself walking into when you're trying to do something unique and
Mm-hmm.
different in any sector, nonprofit or for profit.
Yep. Yeah, we ran into it with, Surreal Salon. There were discussions early on. Now it's a big part of the gallery. It's an important part of the calendar for BRG each year. But early on, it was not that way. I think 2 of the first 3 years we lost money on the program, and it took some, convincing. It took some uh, faith in the future of what that program could be on the part of the board, on part of the staff. Um, there was a lot of discussion about whether or not the intended impact of having, bringing a younger audience, um, having different faces at the gallery would result from this program. And over time, it's helped on that front, but early on there was plenty of discussion that kind of at its root got back to that. That's not the way you do that. So
And honestly, I think that that kind of is the inevitability of doing something different. People don't appreciate it until it's successful.
sure.
And I mean that's the same issue I experience with my own work. The way in which people have responded to my work now, even though I'm still growing and still trying to evolve, and I'm not nearly where I would like to be in any form or fashion. When it was 2017, then it was like, okay, oh, okay, that's cute, that's cool, you're doing this. Let me know when it evolves.
Hmm.
And then 2019 came around, and I was blessed to be awarded the United Way Pass the Torch Award and start hosting more diverse events that actually reflected what I wanted to do with the community.
Right.
And then, of course, the interview series, and people are a lot more receptive because they realize, oh, wow, this stuff works. Or you've been doing this for a while. So, I mean, yes, you're doing something right if you
Right.
haven't given up. So it's like, I think that kind of comes with the territory. People are wanting to see whether or not it'll be successful. And then when it's successful, everybody will be like, oh my God, I knew it was going to be awesome.
Hmm.
I knew this was going to be great. And I'm like, no, you didn't. You told me it was going to fail from the moment I opened my mouth to tell you. But also, let's talk about Baton Rouge for a second, because there are a lot of conversations about the community's culture, not like linguistic or art culture, just the way in which we relate to each other. And one of the biggest issues I see, not just in the arts community, but just in general, is that there's so much happening in the city, but there's a divide in terms of who participates in what and what kind of events people are able to have exposure to. So there have been events that I've attended, and I've frankly wondered, okay, where are the Black people? And the reason why is because they host an event on the other side of town, all the way to the far end of the town, which is not accessible to a lot of people, or there's no outreach being done to more marginalized, vulnerable communities, and it tends to be the same people who look the same way, have the same background, have the same experiences. And that tends to be Baton Rouge. It's a very divided place in which people, instead of trying to mend those divides, just kind of embrace them. So how has the gallery tried to make sure that it doesn't fall into that trap of working with the divide as opposed to confronting it?
I would start by saying, in no way is the gallery, I think, where I'd like to see it, or where the gallery as an organization would like to see itself in terms of doing exactly that. I think it's an ongoing process. For us, we talk about access, we talk about being accessible, and part of that is centered around the fact that we are in a public park. It is free and open to the public 6 days a week, except for Mondays. You can come anytime and walk right in the door and enjoy the show. And there isn't the kind of ticket price barrier. Obviously, we do have ticketed events, but our bread and butter of being open and having exhibitions, they're free and open to the public. So theoretically, anybody can come. That being said, as we continue to grow, a lot of the conversations that are being had at the staff level and at the board level are centered around how do we go and meet people where they already are, instead of always asking them to come to us, always trying to get people into our venue, which is in City Park. How do we do more outreach, get into other communities, other zip codes, speak to people who might not come to the opening receptions that we have on First Wednesdays or the artist talks. And I certainly think that's an ongoing process. Part of it, one of the things that we're hoping to do is feature more, diversify the artist membership as a whole. Have it be, if you look back at the history of the gallery, you have some of the biggest name visual artists like Frank Hayden, Al Laverne, who were crucially important to art as it relates to Southern University. They were a part of the gallery in its early days. Today, you've got folks like Randall Henry, and more recently, now one of our newest artist members, John Elaine, keeping and even reinvigorating that tie with Southern University. So hopefully, the more we diversify the artist membership and the people who are showing work on these walls, the more people from diverse communities will feel like this is a place where they can see themselves represented on the walls, and hopefully, even more so in the audience, in the crowd at an event or at a presentation. So that's those two things of representing more diverse viewpoints within the artwork, and then actually doing outreach and getting beyond our space and kind of coupling the invitation to come to things that are at the gallery, and then kind of bringing the gallery and its programming out to other communities, will hopefully continue to make that a better situation, I guess.
Yeah, accessibility is important for me because growing up, I didn't have exposure to these things. I was blessed to be able to have that curiosity and cultural rich childhood in the midst of being in a working class environment, to where I had an interest, but the interest didn't meet the supply. So, I didn't know that there was a Baton Rouge gallery that was open to the public and free. I didn't know that these things were accessible to me as a young person or even as a teenager. And I wish that I had these things. I wish that I was able to see the culture that existed in Baton Rouge, but there wasn't an effort being made to reach out to people who look like me, or people who came from my backgrounds, or weird Black kids who were looking for a place to be heard. That didn't exist for me until I was a teenager and on my way out the door, leaving Baton Rouge for college. So I wish that more young people who came up around the time I came up, had access to this. maybe that would have prevented the exodus that kind of happens with people that turn 18 in Baton Rouge.
Yep.
And also, I think that it would probably have led to a more stronger connection. But I feel like that could happen now, like this whole
Sure.
greater connectivity of nonprofits. I mean, I think that the only way that Baton Rouge can personally grow and develop its culture is through collaboration. Because yeah, we all might do different things, but it's one of those like you scratch my back, I scratch yours kind of thing, where it's like we may not be working on the same things, but we all have something that the other person doesn't. So
Mhm.
maybe you might have resources, but we have people power. We may have people power but not have resources. You may have notability, but you may not have the fresh ideas. Someone may have the fresh ideas, but they may be more low key.
Yep.
And I think that collaboration is one good way to allow for that expansion of work and expansion of art into the community, as well as just giving more people opportunities to be represented, because when you collaborate with more people, you share more ideas, and those ideas can refresh and revitalize institutions and practices that we do on a consistent basis. And that also results in more diverse representation, which lends itself to bringing more people in, because they not only see themselves reflected in the work, they also see themselves reflected in the decision making and in the process itself.
Right. Yeah, and to your point about access and even, being aware, when I was growing up, art wasn't really a big part of my life either. My family did not go to museums or galleries. I come from a working class family. Just wasn't part of my upbringing for the most part. Not to say that there wasn't culture in other respects, but not in, you know, if thinking back to my childhood, I probably wouldn't have come to Baton Rouge Gallery, as a kid myself. But it was, I think a lot of that gets back to misconceptions about what art galleries or what museums are and who they're for, and whether or not they're there for primarily there for the wealthy, primarily there for folks who might be walking in with an art history background or extensive knowledge base. My hope is that the gallery is somewhere that people feel comfortable that they can come and they're not going to be challenged in the sense that they're going to be asked a question that will catch them off guard and feel like they need to pull back from 18th century art history knowledge base or something. But instead it's a place where people can come and enjoy work, enjoy art, and hopefully when we get back to being able to have events, enjoy one another and be able to do that kind of communal gathering experience as well. But yeah, access and feeling welcome in a space is incredibly important.
And that's the other thing. We are in the midst of a pandemic, and every interview I've done has been in the midst of a pandemic.
Right.
I mean, maybe at some point I'll have an interview where I'm like sitting and looking at somebody in the face, but I don't know if that's going to happen. And so, in the meantime, yeah, I mean, in the meantime, what have you done to kind of confront, for lack of a better way of saying it, the pandemic and kind of adjust your programming and your operations as a gallery in the midst of the pandemic? Because a lot of people I've spoken to who either are part of our galleries or even run our galleries in passing, they have not done so hot during this pandemic. Some have even shut down for good, just closed the doors with no chance of returning because of the pandemic. So I was just wondering, how has the Baton Rouge Gallery kind of managed and held up through all of this?
We've been pretty fortunate. Honestly, we've been lucky in the sense that our members and our donors have stuck with us, and we've in part because we've put a lot of work into trying to pivot and figure out how to navigate a pandemic, and it's been difficult because we've really leaned into events. We've really leaned into in recent years the idea of a lot of what the gallery brings to Baton Rouge is happening at those events and when people are sharing space together. So for us to have not had a first Wednesday opening since March, when those first Wednesdays depending on the show that might be on the walls, you might have 300 to 400 people or more come through the gallery in 3 hours. And we get really excited about that. To have hundreds of people come out for local contemporary art in Baton Rouge on a Wednesday night is really, really exciting. So to not have those events is really a big shift for us. We closed the doors in mid-March, I want to say about March 15th, if I remember correctly. And within days, we were working on things that would be kind of COVID safe. The first thing we did was called the Flat Curve Gallery, which was an online portal, an online gallery where anybody could submit work. The idea was that we were encouraging people to stay home, and while you're home, create something, make a work of art. You don't have to, this doesn't need to be a, huge oil painting or anything. Just make some form of art and send us a picture. Share it with us. Let us share it with the community. And that was a huge hit. We had everything from 2-year-olds with sidewalk chalk to professional artists with work in the Whitney Museum's permanent collection. It was a huge project. It was a lot of fun for us to see the work that was coming in. By the end of it, we had over 500 artists who were a part of it. Obviously, mostly from the Baton Rouge area, but not exclusively. We had, I think, artists from Montana, California participate. So that was kind of our first, pivot in terms of COVID. And it really was born from a place of, as an art gallery, as an arts organization that has for 50 plus years been about trying to connect artists and audiences. What is our role in this world? How do we continue to do that and try to be of some service to the city that we are in? So that was a program that we had a lot of fun with. We worked on a kind of virtual interview offering called Artists in Residences, where we did something not terribly unlike this. It was certainly a shorter form, so we didn't get quite as deep. But we would interview our own artist members, artists who were part of that Flat Curve Gallery, and then we'd have musicians or poets, do readings or present a new song. The other thing that we started in June was we started producing masks and having masks with artists work on them. And that was something that has been a huge hit. We've had those masks go out to 33 different states and Iceland and Norway. How they found out about it, I have no idea, but I'm glad they did. But that's been a big help too. So we've done, I'd like to think, a good bit to try and pivot and figure out how to navigate that. The gallery has been back open since the beginning of June. So while we're not having events, and we haven't had any events since mid-March, the gallery's still here. If people want to come in and see the work, they're more than welcome to do so. Mask required, social distancing, all those kinds of things are in place. But it's been interesting. It's been, it's definitely taken a lot of hard work from an incredible group of people who are on the staff here to pivot and find ways to make it work.
The pandemic has really forced a lot of us to be more innovative. I mean, this whole interview series would not have existed if it weren't for the pandemic, because the whole purpose of it was just to think of a way, people are disconnected, people feel like their worlds are shrinking, and also people are looking for ways to expand their knowledge of people, places, and things, since they can't travel or go to a museum and they can't go into a classroom and learn. So I was thinking about a way to get people to learn more about the community. And since the pandemic allowed for more people outside of Louisiana to start kind of watching 821's work, it kind of made me think about the fact that, okay, 821, we are based in Louisiana, but we don't want to tell someone from Texas or England or Italy or Nigeria they can't participate in our program because they don't live in Louisiana. So
Right.
what is a good way to show, our culture to the world? And also, when we talk about Louisiana, it's always negative. It's a sense of, oh my God, we have all these problems, or there's nothing to do here. I wanted to find a way to showcase the culture and the consciousness, as I say, of Louisiana, and show people we are actually working to solve these problems. We are doing our galleries. We are teaching language. We are fighting for justice. We're doing these things. And I don't think the idea would have originated if it weren't for the pandemic kind of pushing me to do something like this.
Right.
So pandemic has really forced us to be innovative and make the best of what we got, because while at the time of this interview, there will be more vaccines rolling out and we're going to get through the pandemic, it's probably going to be a while, maybe not until summer when we actually start seeing the results of the vaccines and maybe start having a little bit of normalcy. And that is if we all kind of get in this mindset of trying to confront the pandemic as opposed to living with the pandemic.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I think, to your point, for me at least, the pandemic has kind of reinforced that idea that we are all interconnected. We can't hide from it. Your actions, you're not wearing a mask, you're going out in public when you know that you might have had exposure to COVID. Your actions impact me. That interconnectedness, I think, is all the more apparent when everybody in the world is dealing with the pandemic. Obviously, not everybody in the world is dealing with the pandemic quite the way we are in the US these days, but everybody knows what COVID is. Everybody knows, what the implications are. Everybody knows somebody who's been touched by it, if you don't even have personal, kind of firsthand experience with it. So that idea that we are interconnected, and I think for a lot of people, it spurred that curiosity, like you were mentioning, about wanting to learn more, wanting to, having somebody in Italy or England wanting to learn more about something that might be going on in Louisiana.
Right. I think that the pandemic has definitely made true my mom's words when she would always tell me when I was younger. She would always say, "You don't live in the world by yourself." And she would always tell this to me when I would do things that were a bit childish, because I was a child, of course, but kind of do things, or I'm a very independent person, so I don't always like asking for help or asking people for things. And every time I would end up having that bite me in the butt, she'd be like, "You don't live in the world by yourself. If you need help, then you ask for help. Like there's people, everything you do impacts people. So don't be so selfish and self-centered in your existence." And I do feel like, I hope one of the biggest lessons we get from the pandemic is this idea that we don't live in the world by ourselves, and our actions do have consequences, and we have to be a little bit more mindful of how we treat people. I have a couple final questions to wrap up. Thinking about your journey, I mean, I probably going to bet that 2 decades ago, running an art gallery for over a decade was not something that you had envisioned for yourself. But here you are, and you've been doing it for 12 years. And, Baton Rouge Gallery is in this community, in here, in the trenches. Like, everybody knows about it, and you all get a lot of support here and also globally. But what is next for the future? What are some things that you like to do with the gallery in the future, even in the midst of this pandemic and beyond it?
It's certainly, the gallery has been fortunate to grow and kind of expand the city's awareness of it. And hopefully that's something that we're just getting started with. We want everybody in the city to be more aware of the gallery and the different programming going on. And part of that is or a lot of that is on us to make sure that happens. Like I mentioned before, about not trying to find a balance between inviting people to things that are happening here and inviting people, making sure that people are aware of what's going on here, but then also us going and finding them and going out and meeting people where they are. So that's one thing that I hope we're trying to position ourselves to do a lot more of in the coming years. The other thing that I think is important is trying to strike a balance and find a way for us to continue to keep a local focus, continue to be Baton Rouge Gallery and have a focus on Baton Rouge and Louisiana-based artists, but expand the conversation a little bit more and bring in some, at least periodically bringing in artists from outside of our area, bringing viewpoints in and styles that can supplement the conversation about what art is and what contemporary art is, I think is really important. I think it adds to the texture of local art and what local artists do. The more that we make it available to local audiences and to the artists themselves, what might be going on in contemporary art outside of our area, which is something, that other organizations do as well. I don't want to make it sound as if there isn't any access to art from national names within our city or anything, but finding ways for us to bridge that gap between our local artists and a bigger national conversation or even international conversation, finding ways for us to build bridges that might foster collaboration between our artists and artists who might work in New York or LA or Nashville or other areas, and try and help our local artists get into that national conversation a little bit more, and help that national conversation infiltrate Baton Rouge a little bit more. So those are kind of the two wrinkles, I guess, that I would hope to add to what Baton Rouge Gallery is in the coming years.
And my second to last question, and I'll tell you why it's the second to last in a second, is that you talked a lot about, how your life journey kind of was. You had an idea for yourself, and then it didn't quite, manifest in that way. Like you wanted to go to law school, but then life happened. You realized that you wanted to do something different, and then you ended up in this gig that you have now.
Yeah.
And you talk about, specifically during this interview, you talked about how it wasn't easy, and you had moments where you were second guessing yourself. What advice would you have to people who are in a position where they feel like, okay, I'm doing something, but I'm not quite sure this is the right path, because right now things look very difficult. Like, okay, the bills are not getting paid by what I'm trying to do. The people aren't coming like I want them to come. I'm not feeling as though this is moving forward. But I feel like this is something I really want to do, but I'm just not seeing any results yet. What would your advice be to people in that position?
I kind of got chilled when you were asking the question, because I remember that's a very real, very scary feeling to have. I remember being out the window that is right next to me here. I remember being right on the other side of that window early on at the gallery, when I was very new to leading a nonprofit. And the finances weren't looking great, and my personal finances weren't looking great at the time, and thinking, I really messed up. I should have stayed with law school. This was a bad move. And those anxieties, that imposter syndrome, all of those things were crashing down on me in that moment. So I would say to anybody who's in that spot, know that you're not the first person to be in that spot. Nor was I. Like that's probably a really common thing for anybody in a nonprofit, especially, and I was in a position where I'm coming into a nonprofit that's been in Baton Rouge for decades. I can only imagine, the struggle of starting, founding, and building up your own nonprofit from the ground up. I think one of the things that it took me a while to learn, that I think gets to that point, was the value, and you brought it up earlier, was the value of collaboration. I think early on, one of the faults that I had in how I approached the gallery and my work was that it felt like I needed everybody to know that it came from this place, that it was Baton Rouge Gallery's program first and foremost. And I was kind of frankly afraid of the collaboration and sharing in the credit for things that were accomplished. And it took me a little while to realize that was to my detriment. It was to the detriment of my organization. And so I would say, somebody who might be in that position, think about who you can reach out to. Think about who might have maybe not this, the same mission, but who might have a mission that can line up with yours for a program or for some campaign, for some effort, that can help grow your organization, grow awareness of the organization, and ultimately grow support for your organization and what you're hoping to accomplish and how you want to make the world or your community a better place. I remember Kitty Feeney, who is the assistant director of the LSU School of Art, had a very real heart-to-heart with me one day about, the value of collaboration and the value of working together like that, and kind of showed me the error of my ways in terms of, opening things up and letting more people get involved. So that'd be my, first, don't panic, you'll be okay. You're not the first person to have that experience, but then, who can you ask for help? Who can you reach out to and try and, work really hard, and how can you make their organization better, and that, have a relationship that is mutually beneficial.
And then also, I probably would also say that another, to add on to that advice, is to just be more vulnerable, because
Yeah.
I think for me, I'm naturally a very guarded, closed off person, which is not always a good thing. And so I don't really talk about the things I go through. And I realized that maybe if I were, I've had moments where I've been like, okay, I finally am open about what I need, and then suddenly everybody's rushing to help me, and I'm like, wow, okay,
Yep.
maybe this whole telling people I need help thing isn't so bad. I mean, that's one of the struggles of being an only child. It's like you are independent and you don't like asking for help because you're basically in this mindset of, okay, I don't have an older brother or older sister to go to kind of beg for help, so
Mhm.
I got to figure this out on my own. So that was my thought process. And starting a nonprofit, you're right, is not easy, especially when you're doing it with very little support, very little people power, and you have to be out there yourself, getting people to believe in your work. And you have to go through those moments where you realize that your growth and your ability to grow your nonprofit is also connected and an intrinsic part of your own personal growth as well.
Yep.
That for me was a revelation I had very recently. And
Kudos
it's,
to you for doing it,
oh, thank you.
for
Thank
sure.
you. Thank you. And one last question. So obviously you've had lots of job interviews. You've probably done lots of interviews, and every feeling that we always get at the end of the interview is, man, I wish I said this. Man, I wish I said that. I should have talked about this more. I should have talked about that more. And I always want to make sure that through the Expanding Our Roots interview series, or any time I talk to somebody, you leave feeling as though you've expressed everything that you want to say, as opposed to leaving and then all of a sudden you're like, I could have talked about this a little bit more. I forgot to mention this. So what are some final thoughts or some things that you like to share that you didn't get a chance to expand on or talk about, or even just some parting words you'd like to leave with the people who will be watching this particular interview?
There is a 0% chance that in 20 minutes, I'm not thinking about what I should have said right now to answer that question specifically. But having said that, I think the main thing that I would say is a the arts are need to be an integral part of how we address Baton Rouge going forward. I feel like a lot of times we're talking about um, how to make Baton Rouge and really the state a better place, how to make it, a city of the 21st century, and we hear phrases like that. And I don't know that the arts always get the credit they deserve for the impact that they have in other places in terms of how they've been a part of the revitalization of different cities or states. There's plenty of studies out there about the economic impact, about the impact that having artists in a city can have in terms of increasing civic engagement, decreasing childhood poverty, like all of these things that you would never, that most people would never think of as being tied or having any correlation to having the arts in a city, they do. And there's a lot of impact that the arts can have on quality of place. And as we talk about what is Baton Rouge, what is life in Baton Rouge, I think the arts need to be and should be a bigger part of that. I think if we think about Louisiana as a state, it is an incredibly special place. One of the reasons that I wanted to move here was because of my understanding of what Louisiana culture was from 1,000 miles away. And my understanding of it now, living in Louisiana since 2005, is vastly different from what my understanding of it was back then. But Louisiana is one of the most culturally rich states in this country. And I think the arts and culture needs to be a bigger part of how we position ourselves going forward. The other thing I might mention is I think Baton Rouge oftentimes has a lack of hope, a lack of realization that there is a bright future ahead. I think a lot of times we get bogged down with some negativity that you might find in the comment section of social media posts or things like that. And it persists with a narrative persists that Baton Rouge is one thing, where Baton Rouge has, this future ahead of it. And I think, some of that stems from a lack of awareness about what other cities might face, what other places encounter. But I think Baton Rouge needs to love itself a little more than it does. And, there's a lot of really cool stuff going on in Baton Rouge. Baton Rouge has plenty of problems. You mentioned one of it, the dividing lines that we have in the city in terms of, geographically and socially. And problems like that exist in other cities. Let's, instead of just saying that problem exists, what are some things we might be able to do to, what are some things that we can look at other cities having done to try and combat that and make it better? But let's not just resign ourselves to talking about the negative things that our city has, and realize that there's some really wonderful things going on in the city and some wonderful people doing real work to make it better. So that's my rambling answer to your question.
Well, I think it's a good final thought. The only way that I'll close is I promised to explain what expanding our roots was.
Okay.
At the end. And basically, when I talk about 821, I talk about just the story about, my upbringing and how that inspired things. And one of the things that I like to emphasize to people is that the whole idea of global connectedness actually started here locally. And I remember overhearing someone talk about my background, like, oh my God, this is Jahi, he's traveled, and your travels is why you started 821. I was like, actually, no, it's not. Like travel helped me to see the world. But in order for you to have a desire, it has to start somewhere. And for me, it started at home. My roots were planted in this community, but I felt as though there was more to the world than just my community. I wanted to see the world and experience the world while having a deep connection to the place that I was currently in. So that's what the whole idea of expanding your roots comes from. You have a connection to the place that you live in or you grew up in, but you should always be willing to see and experience and connect with people who don't look like you or come from the same places and spaces you come from, and not see that as deleterious to your ability to understand and fulfill yourself. Right. And so when you expand your roots, you are aware of who you are, you're aware of where you come from, and you're aware of where you're going, but you're not afraid to connect with others. And that's why the 821 logo is a big oak tree, because, those thick roots, but those branches, they just go everywhere. Right. And that's where it comes from, expanding our roots. Ergo, the interview series, I am usually in one place interviewing people who are in all these different places, who have gone different places, learning new things, expanding my mind, and others who are watching the series have felt the same way.
Yeah. And congrats on doing it. Congrats on season 2.
I don't know if I can call it season 2. I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know how to describe it, honestly. I'm like, is it a season? Because it feels kind of obnoxious to say season 2. Let's year 2. Year two. That's
Congrats,
we'll do that.
Year 2.
Yeah, I think I realized how obnoxious season 2 could sound. So year 2 is probably better.
Well, when Netflix picks it up, you'll be calling them seasons anyway.
That would be really cool. But yeah.